Welcome to the early years, nurturing reading from birth to school age. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to have you here tonight. Um, my name is Mariana Carazo, for those who know me already. I have more than 20 years of experience within the classroom setting. Reading has always been a passion of mine, and it's been like 15 years of me, probably even more than 15, around 20, of me being interested in the reading world. It all started many, many years ago by default, because when I went to grad school or even to college, I was not trained on how to teach reading. This was something that came to my life out of the blue because I used to own a center in Costa Rica for gifted children, and eventually turned out to um, do remediation as well in intervention. And that's how I actually met Christine, who's sharing the stage with me tonight. In that world, we started learning about dyslexia and reading difficulties, and I started taking some trainings within reading instruction for intervention. And that's when I first discovered what phonological awareness was, what phonemic awareness was, and how to actually introduce reading within a formal instruction. A couple of years later, a company here in the United States, Learning Without Tears, that it was formerly Handwriting Without Tears, and had a sister company called Really Great Reading. And both of them, then actually, Really Great Reading and Handwriting Without Tears, now Learning Without Tears, are still amazing companies. They hired me as a consultant. And one of the main projects that I had to create was to start brainstorming products for their new pre K program. In that pre-K program, I started doing some research on phonological awareness because there was this one box that had a huge phonological awareness component. And I started doing the research behind science of reading and phonological awareness. And I was a little bit familiarized with the way it was delivered because of the reading intervention programs that I was already in touch with. I was training Barton reading system back in the days, Wilson, and I kind of knew a little bit about reading. After I continued doing the research for this company, I totally fell in love because I saw how magical it was. Back in the days, this was the beginning of some companies and some creators adding the science of reading within mainstream instruction. That's when I realized that phonological awareness was not just for children who needed intervention, but for all learners. And that's how actually my online business was born. I created a mini course about phonological awareness and a PDF with instructions. And to the day, it is one of my best sellers. I have not changed a bit of it, and I will not change an inch of it because it has been, it is a great course. I delivered an amazing result out of many years of research. So that's my story um, behind reading. When I opened the Learning Garage, all of a sudden I realized that I had four children struggling, and I was suspecting about possible dyslexia. When I started creating my program in the Learning Garage, I wanted to teach for the 21st century with the best resources. So, of course, reading was delivered by myself, putting together all these pieces of learning that I had, creating my own curriculum, and delivering formal reading instruction based on the science of reading. After I created all these resources and I started detecting these children with reading difficulties, and at the time they were 5 or 6, so it was very early. It was really, really early intervention that I was doing right there. Um, we were able to evaluate them when they turned 7, when it's the right time to evaluate for reading difficulties, and they all turn out to be dyslexic. And the parents gifted me a training in Orton Gilligan, which is one of the best intervention programs. So here I was taking reading instruction courses after many years to just kind of polish all my knowledge and see what was new out there. And here I am sharing with you all how reading looks like in the 21st century.
Hi, my name is Christine Reich. I am from Costa Rica as well. I've known Mariana for a long time, and I think now hearing her tell her story or her background and how reading came to her, it was in a very similar way. I was not working for a company, but we were working together at that time. So I am a special educator and I'm an educational therapist. And at the same time as this was happening, and I was working with developing minds, but in Costa Rica, all of these students started to come into our practice, and they had a learning difficulty. So at that time, we called it, and still we call it, but in Spanish it has changed a little bit the name, remedial intervention. And it has always been remedial intervention that you have to use and apply best practices so that your students can move on forward and they can succeed. By that same time, phonological awareness came into that, into our radar. And that, at that moment, we began to add into the sessions phonological awareness, and that became a breakthrough, and that became a difference into those struggling readers that we were not able to move on forward just by reading books or by repeating words. So we did this whole process of phonological awareness before. At the same time went by, and a lot of courses and related to the area of reading and intervention I came across. And that has changed during the years, the way that I do the remedial program or the remedial intervention with the students. And during the last couple of years, the science of reading has been to everybody into knowledge, right? We're all talking about the science of reading. So what is the science of reading? What is this roar that everyone's talking about? A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to attend DyslexiaCon in Texas. That was in 2022, and it was amazing. It was just after COVID, so it was a lot of people who were joining there together. And I think I had a before and an after I attended this DyslexiaCon, because I was able to live in the flesh what is the science of reading, to understand and to see all of these psychologists, neurologists, all of these people in the science field doing their research for many years in brains, in dyslexic brains, non-dyslexic brains, to see how reading develops throughout. And that is part of the science of reading, which we're going to see today. Currently, I moved to Florida with my family, and I came up again. Mariana and I crossed paths together, and here we are. So here we are talking about the science of reading and about this important age of reading from birth until the school age. The early years, nurturing reading from birth to school age. Introduction to the science of reading. I want to welcome you to this amazing webinar that we have prepared for you. It has been so creative and so amazing, and we had to decide what information we added, what information we're going to hold on for a little bit, because this topic, it's so incredible. It's so filled not only with a lot of information, but we want to share everything. not only to parents, if parents are joining today, but also to educators, to therapists, so that they can improve their teaching practices. What is the science of reading? So the science of reading, it's also called SOAR, by SOR. It's a vast body of research that explains how children learn to read and the best practices for teaching them. The research spans cognitive psychology, linguistics, neuroscience, educators with decades of evidence. It has been going on for more than 50 years. It's not brand new, people, more than 50 years. It's very important because by following all of these evidence-based methods, educators can provide more effective instruction, ensuring all children, including those with reading difficulties, they have strong foundation for reading success. Because the way that our brain works for reading, or the way that we learn how to read, it's the same for all dyslexic and non-dyslexics. This is the definition. There is an ebook that you can find online about from the Reading League, and they have this definition. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. This research has been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world, and it is derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. The science of reading has culminated amazingly with a vast of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develops, why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach, and therefore improve students' outcomes through prevention and intervention for reading difficulties. The science of reading is derived from researchers in multiple fields. We are going to have those researchers from cognitive psychology, communication sciences, developmental psychology education, special education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience, school psychology, and I bet there's even more. The science of reading is not. The science of reading is not an ideology or a philosophy. It's not a trend. It's not a new idea. It's not a pendulum swing. It's not a political agenda. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a program of instruction. This is very important, and we're going to see why. It's not a single specific component of instruction, such as phonics. So there is no program called the science of reading. We're going to talk about the big 5. The 5 components of literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So the National Reading Panel, starting in 1997, they were called upon by the U.S. Congress to assess research-based strategies on teaching children to read. So in the year 2000, the panel released a report outlining these 5 essential components of reading instruction based on a thorough review of existing research. So the findings from the National Reading Panel have a significant impact on reading instruction, forming the foundations of many structured literacy programs and policies like the No Child Left Behind Act in the USA. So this is very important what I'm mentioning right now, because what I just said is that the National Reading Panel, after research, came with this big 5, with these components of structured literacy. And They have been forming the foundations, and they have been forming many programs that are based on the structured. And we don't call it, my program is based on the science of reading. No, it's a structured literacy program. Phonemic awareness is the ability to recognize and to manipulate individual sounds. Those sounds are called phonemes in words. So, for example, we're going to hear that k sound in cat. Phonics is understanding the relationship between sounds and their corresponding letters or letter patterns. This is the beginning of the alphabetic principle. For example, I'm going to know that the letter C represents the k sound, as in cat, and sometimes letter C is going to represent that sound, as in cycle. Fluency is the ability to read a text quickly and accurately with an appropriate expression. For example, reading a sentence smoothly without frequent pauses. Vocabulary is knowing the meaning of words, both spoken and written. For example, understanding the word butterfly in a context. Comprehension, the ability to understand and interpret what is being read. So, for example, following the storyline of a book and answering questions about it. The National Reading Panel was not very, or it doesn't say a specific order in which they can be taught. However, we know, because of the science of reading and a structured literacy program, we definitely begin with phonological awareness, with that phonemic awareness, then phonics, and then we continue with the rest. As we work upon the rest, we always go back to that one. So think about it as big as an umbrella. And in this umbrella, we're going to see phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary development, and comprehension. So these are the key components of reading. And to remember them, it's easier when we see them under this picture and this image of the umbrella. They are together, they work together.
I was muted. So I'm going to go ahead and rewind. Early literacy milestones from birth to age. My time to roll now, and you have to bear with me because I'm doing all the changes of the screen and adding the links into the comments. So I will be sharing with you whatever we mentioned through the comments. If you want to ask a question, please start typing them as we speak, because at the end we will have a questions and answers portion. So don't forget to type them. You can type them as you think about them, and we will answer them at the very end. All right, so time to roll. Early literacy milestones from birth to age 6. For us to understand as educators and parents how literacy really looks like, I believe that it is very simple if we break it down by ages. And for these ages, let me put myself into a smaller square. You will see the most beautiful models because I have a model per age. So we're going to go ahead and start with the foundation of language development from birth. So when children are born, children actually start the reading process because they start to explore with their senses and their mouth and grabbing and looking at pictures and having this direct contact with the adult or the caregiver. They react to sounds, to voices, to songs. And as they, I mean, think about the immense development that happens in this first year of life. Children go from being born to walking. By the age of 12 months old, you will see them. Actually, this is Max, and he was probably around 12 months here. He was already sitting, he was already engaged with books. He loved books, he knew where the books were. I had like these books are the textured books, and he would be engaged with this literacy since very early age. I also want to add to what Christine said about us thinking about reading as only as books or only as decoding, which is only one part of that umbrella. I want you to know since the very beginning that reading is actually a masterpiece. It's a work of art. And when we teach reading, we have to know a lot in order to be prepared to successful reading instruction. When children turn 12 to 24 months, you will see them even more engaged into stories. They like to turn books and pages, and they like to see stories. Even though if they don't know, of course, how to read, children are engaged with the pictures. At this age, parents often tell me, Mariana, they get bored when I read the book because, of course, those long books are very long for children with a short attention span. At this age, we're making up stories based on what we see, observation, developing vocabulary, and using simple books with simple words, with images. They love to see picture books. They love to see books that have vocabulary. So that's what we see from age 12 to 24 months. As they continue to grow, we see these babies explore books. They love storytelling. They love nursery rhymes and all these songs that we have to offer. And they start talking about their daily routines because language is pretty much developed at this age, and they can verbally tell us what they see in the books. How can we have discussions? How can we share ideas of what we see in the books? When children turn 2 or 3, their vocabulary is growing significantly, and we'll talk about vocabulary later on. And they can even share more verbally. So they engage in simple storytelling. They can actually engage in longer periods of time when it comes to reading stories and picture books. They have favorite books. I actually, in these first couple of years, I really like sharing books with songs. There are a lot of books that have songs associated with the book, and they really enjoy these type of books. When children are between ages, if you see it, think about it, between birth and age 3, our main role as caregivers or parents or educators as well is to provide and foster all these opportunities to fall in love with books, with stories, with developing this hunger for words and develop new vocabulary. When children turn 3 to 4 years old, they are way more aware, and they have a better sentence structure. They can formally say sentences and express feelings. They can start recognizing some of the letters in the print. They can start beginning and understand some of the sounds that they see in these written words. By age 3, they start recognizing symbols by themselves. Some children, not all, can read at age 3 and 4. Some start reading by that age. It's not the norm, but it could happen. And it's not what we're expecting, but it happens. At age 3 to 4, they know the sequences, what happens first. Also, between ages 2 and a half, almost 3 to 4, they like us reading the same books over and over and over again. They like this repetition. At age 4 or 5, we have children hungry for literacy. Their interests are well defined. They know what they want. They know the topics that they enjoy. They start seeing these sounds. Some of them start to be able to decode some of the words. Some start recognizing some symbols. And children are already have already a habit for these reading and love for reading books. When children start turning 5 or 6 is when we start seeing this interest in this reading language. They develop the ability to sound out some simple words, some of them, which is decoding, and I say it out loud, some of them, because children can develop and should be developing the reading process up to age 7. So, in these first years of life, we are giving them the foundations, which we will be talking about. So, I don't want to make you feel that by age 5 or 6, they have to be reading. Some are decoding words, some are still not interested, and that is totally okay. We start expanding vocabulary through more advanced books and conversations. We start beginning to read independently. They go through books back and forth. They have interest. They know what they want and what they want to read. Why is it so important that we develop early years in literacy in early years? The foundation that we are giving children in these first years of life, this pre-reading process that we are doing, and actually when people tell me that children should not be reading before 7, I kind of have to disagree. I agree and disagree because what I think about the reading pace is that every child decides when he or she is ready for the reading process. What we need to know is that they have until age 7 to develop reading skills. But if they decide to read at 3, we're not going to stop them. If they decide to read at 5, we're not going to stop them. This all depends on each type of learner, on the interest. For instance, my middle child, Alberto, he loved letters and he loved letters since he was 1.5, and he mastered all the letters in the alphabet by age 2. He knows all the letters. He knows how to identify the letters. He's still not reading because I have not pushed that reading, but the interest was there. So I just exposed him to the skill. We have to really be mindful and listen and observe our children. Same thing happens when we see red flags. By age 5 or 6, if there's a struggle, you will see it. You will see children struggling with, and I know Christine will be talking about this later on. You will see children struggling with remembering their letters and identifying the letters. And these are things that should not be ignored either. You write them down, you find a specialist, and you start keeping track of the reading process. This foundation will strongly predict reading success. All this foundation from birth to age 6. I always like to say that it's like the foundation of this house. It's what makes it strong, because the stronger these skills are, the stronger the readers they will become. It's also aligned with children who lack these foundational skills may struggle with reading comprehension, may struggle with fluency later in life. So, encouraging these milestones from a young age ensures well prepared children for the formal reading instruction world. What can you do to develop reading in early years? All right, so as parents, as educators, what do we do? So now we know that first, we promote literacy. We make our children love books. We surround our children by books. And I'm going to talk about different types of books later on in the webinar. And we get books depending on the age that are appropriate for the children. We promote them. We promote reading. We promote read alouds. Um, we promote this connection between parents, caregivers, and educators within the literacy setting. We want to make sure that children are well prepared in this process. So again, we make sure that they're progressing. If we see them stuck, we see the red flags, we take note, and we find a specialist. But the more we understand the process, the easier it will get. Ironically, and I have to say this, society is pushing us to master skills at ages in which children are not ready to master skills. I'll be talking about this a little bit when I start my first area of reading. It is very, very important that we think about the importance that talking, singing, and interaction with adults from birth gives and promote children. If we think about, and why am I emphasizing on human beings? Because children are having way too much exposure with screens. These social interactions are being taken over screens. And we want children to be able to have dialogues with people. We want children to be able to to give this serve and return with caregivers and adults, all these babies fostering all these skills. We want children to be able to talk, to have good language development, to have good vocabulary development, to engage and listen, to develop executive functioning also, which is huge for this reading process. Studies show that children who are talked to more frequently develop stronger vocabularies and literacy skills early on. So we talk about things that surround us, about experiences, and this is one of the best things we can do as caregivers, adults, or educators of children within this stage of life. Think about rich language environments. We want to expose children to environments that are surrounded by books, by experiences, by open-ended toys that will be able to um, extend to these books. We want to use strategies, storytelling. How do we, and that by itself would be an awesome new webinar. How do we tell stories? How do we promote and develop comprehension? How do we visualize? How do we wonder? How do we predict? How can we include nursery rhymes? How can we talk about our daily routines? How can we prompt children to give us full sentences, and not only full sentences, but full thoughts? Because nowadays we are so stuck in our rushed routine that there's no time for these relaxed conversations that children really need for an optimal development. We want parents reading to their babies, to their toddlers, to children before, and not only up to age 6 or 7, because we're talking only until that age, but we want parents to read aloud until they children request it or share it or want to share with us. I love reading with my 9-year-old, and she always wants us to read chapter books at night. And I think that is this is product of a rich language environment throughout the years. We want children to be able to develop listening and sound awareness. We want children to be able to listen to sounds, to nursery rhymes, to songs, to the serve and return, which I was mentioning before, which is a huge predictor of success in childhood. We want children to be able to make a sound, and the adult returns by responding. So if the child cries, I'm going to respond to that sign, to that sound. If the child does, let's say, if does a coo or a gesture, we serve and return. And this builds this baby's confidence. And this is huge for executive functioning and for overall optimal development in childhood. What is phonological awareness? We're going to move into the first domain of that umbrella, or those big fives. And this is my favorite, and I requested teaching this in this webinar. Phonological awareness is the most important, for me, it's one of the most important skills that needs to be developed in reading instruction. Ironically, phonological awareness is one of the skills that schools tend to skip. And by skipping phonological awareness, it's like skipping crawling or skipping before you walk. It's skipping this main foundation that will be predicting success for reading later on. But what is phonological awareness? Because this is new for many people, even educators, because again, I repeat, I was never taught about reading instruction until I started to do my research. Right now, there are more courses, there's more information, and we can instruct ourselves. Phonological awareness is the ability to recognize and manipulate the sounds in spoken language. So when we think about phonological awareness, this is very hard for us because we already know to read, how to read. But children have no idea. They have a white canvas. So phonological awareness is just a discrimination of sounds. So if I say ah for a child that does not identify letters yet or that does not know what a letter is, they will not see the A that you just saw in your mind associated to that sound. When we teach children to manipulate the sounds in isolation, is when we start building the hardest skills that children need to be able to decode. And this is very, very important. When you have dyslexic children or children who are struggling with phonological awareness, with reading, I'm sorry, guess what? They're brought back to the foundations. And with phonological awareness is what all these intervention programs start, because this is the foundation of reading. So we want children to understand that words are made out of sounds or phonemes and that can be broken apart and put back together in different ways. These are critical skills that children need, as I mentioned before, to become confident readers. You're probably a little bit lost, so I will be giving you some examples. Don't you worry. This is a pre-reading skill, and this skill is one of the most important skills, as I mentioned before. When I visit schools or when I see things happening on social media or students from different schools, I tend to see that they start with phonics, which you'll learn what phonics is later on, and they skip this main step. So phonological awareness, I actually drew this image in the afternoon because I came across this visual to help you understand what phonological awareness is. We have all the sounds, and it's not only at the end. It could have been better, but I was in a rush. Phonological awareness comprehends all sounds in isolations. In isolation, we start with words, then move on to syllables, and then to sounds. These individual sounds are what we call phonemes. And this last step is what we call phonemic awareness. So phonological awareness, to make it easy, is like the mom of phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is one component within the phonological awareness instruction. Some programs start with this sound in isolation with only phonemic awareness. And to my knowledge and to my experience, I truly believe that children should start with words that move into syllables and end in smaller units of sounds. If you think about it, we go, and actually I start with sentences. We go from sentences to syllables to onset and rhyme, which is another term used in phonological awareness, to these phonemes. So we're going from the large chunks to the smaller chunks. And when we get to those smaller chunks and children are successfully managing these chunks, they will be ready for the next step, which will be phonics and decode. Developing phonological awareness in the early years. So in the early years, you will see lots of things happen. And I broke it down into years as well, because I think that as parents and educators, like look for this information that is hard to find. So how does it look like? How does develop phonological awareness starts to develop between ages, should be developed by ages between ages 0 and 6. We still use phonological awareness after 6 because it's the main foundation for phonics instruction later on and all the spelling that comes along the way. How does it look like at age 2? So we want to build foundations through sound exposure. So we talk and sing. So children are discriminating rhythms, intonations, and patterns in language. Nursery rhymes like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So there's a repetition, there's something that rhymes. This rhyme and identifying things that rhyme is part of phonological awareness. By exposing our children to nursery rhymes, we're exposing them to phonological awareness. We imitate sounds. So these, um, um, when we have a 1-year-old, and this is typical of us parents, we ask for the sounds that animals make, and these, um, and how the sheep does ba and the cow does moo, and we start with these sounds back and forth, repeating them, and children are developing sound awareness. We also repeat back to their coos, to their babbles, and early words. We clap at their um, successes success when it comes to developing new words, and when they say their first word or when they name something. um, I remember my Alberto, who's my middle child, he was a late talker, so he started speaking when he was, I think, that 2.3, and he had a sound for every single thing. So na was banana, gunga, which is still a formal word in our home, is was truck. And we understood what he was saying based on sounds. We started modeling the right way to say the words, but he has all these sounds developed for his words. By ages 2 to 3, we start seeing children um, playing rhyming games. They love to read books such as Brown Bear, What Do You See? Or they like to play words with rhyming words with what rhymes with cat. I usually say I love to play with my children. Of course, in Spanish is my um, main language. Um, I used to make riddles on their names. So Elena Sirena con cara de ballena. And we started playing all these funny riddles around their names and finding what rhyme with different words. At age 2 or 3, this is so much fun. We enjoy it. They enjoy it. And this develops phonological awareness to a great extent. We clap syllables. We can also clap how many syllables in your name. Mariana, Alberto, and we can develop skills, phonological awareness skills by doing that. We want to imitate sounds. We want to play with beginning sounds like um, the ball bounces, ball bounces, and we want to emphasize on those beginning sounds. When children turn 3 or 4, we start seeing more cognitive abilities. Their brain has matured over time and they are ready for more. Their executive functions are ready to overtake more challenge, to have more mental flexibility, go back and forth. Their working memory is getting a lot stronger. So this is when we can start. They start singing the songs because they can remember all these nursery rhymes, and now they get to sing them, like Itsy Bitsy Spider, like Five Little Monkeys. And we ask children to identify the words that rhyme and that sound the same. We start playing with sounds, such asking children, so sun, what is the first sound that you hear in the word sun? And at this age, as I mentioned before, they have no awareness of letters and sounds, letters associated to sounds. So for them, it's so easy to come up with these sounds. For us, it's even harder because we think immediately about letters, about spelling, and how they associate together. For young children, they remember it's a white canvas. All we're doing is playing with these sounds um, that are just something that they hear. They don't have an association with a formal letter. By age 4 and 5, we start playing with more advanced skills, such as segmentations. We ask children to do the segmentation with syllables. So we already clapped the syllables, but we can change syllables. So let's say carpet. If I change the word pet in carpet for pool, what will you get? Car pool. You're right. And we start playing with all these sounds, changing them, substituting them, deleting them. So if we have carpool without pool, car. And this would be, and it is actually an additional course by itself on knowing how to develop all these steps, because it is not just a game. This is something very informal that I'm sharing here. But when it comes to phonological awareness instruction, which I recommend starts at 4, there's steps for this process. We want to go from those larger chunks to the smaller chunks, and we have to go by steps. First, we isolate the sounds. For example, banana, ba, na, na. Then we isolate the sounds, which one's ba if we have objects or tiles, like I'll show you in a bit when it comes to manipulating the sounds. Then we do the blending all together. Then we do segmentation. Then we take away, pardon, sorry. We do substitution, we change sounds, and then we do deletion, we take away some of these sounds. So knowing how to formally develop phonological awareness is science, and it is an art, and you need to actually follow steps to be able to develop it to a great extent. It's not just about playing. We will be playing and we will be nurturing our children within phonological awareness development, but we also need to learn how to teach it properly. By age 5 and 6, this is when it all happens, because at this age, children are more than ready to master all these phonological awareness skills. We want them to play with syllables. We want them to play with onset and rhymes. We want them to play and start playing with phonemes. And remember the graphic that I showed you before? We want children to get into phonemes by, it's typically is around this age, but again, I don't want to tie a specific age with a specific ability, because it all depends on the child and how fast they move, because there's a scope in this instruction. We start with the larger chunks and we move into the smaller chunks, because that's when we will begin the phonics instruction. All right, so I skipped, let me see, did I skip? No, I'm going to show you this now. So by age 5 and 6, we're ready to do all these more complex skills, such as deletion, substitution, sound matching. And we will also be later on introducing our new friends that we have not mentioned before, which are sounds to the letters. But before we introduce sounds to these letters, I'm going to show you how phonological awareness looks like. Let me put myself, let me see. That's not what I wanted. This is what I want. So we have picture, and you know what? I don't know if this is gonna work. No, because I wanted this to move as I clicked, and they're not gonna move as I click. So let me see, how can I improvise, because I don't have tiles. Well, let's play it without. I'm just gonna be such a great teacher that you're gonna understand. So we have colored tiles here, or objects, or wooden pieces, or marker caps, or baby pouches, caps. We have different colors. When we play with phonological awareness, we play and we say that every single item, let's say baby pouches caps, every single cap has a different color, and each color will represent a sound. So let's say I have 2 sets of words here. We're going to play with the red and with the green. So if I say the word is, let's say, pancake, and you exaggerate, and I have such a small mouth that it actually works even better. I know it's humongous, and it's going to get even bigger when you start teaching phonological awareness. So I ask the children to first listen to the sounds and isolate those sounds. So I say the word is pancake, and look at my mouth. Pancake. All right, let's finger stretch. We start with our thumb. Pancake. How many words do you hear in that word? And they will say two. All right, so let's put up one different color tile or pouch, maybe pouch cap, for each word that you hear. And they pull up both red and green. Now we do the segmentation, I'm sorry. Let's touch and say pancake. Now we do the isolation. Which one's pan? And they would touch the red one. Which one's cake? They would touch the green one. What does it say all together? Pancake. And then we do the blending. If I were to change, let's say, to another word, and I'm thinking, if I were to change pancake for the word cupcake, which of those two circles do I need to change? We change the red one and we use a different color and we put it up there. This game of moving around with sounds in isolation is an art. And you're probably thinking right now, this is so hard. But for children, it's not as hard because their world has no letters yet, no letter sounds yet. So if we think about it in my next slide, we have pancake or we have rainbow. And you are thinking about this when I was saying, you were thinking about this when I was saying the words because you see letters in your head, but they don't. All they see is this, and all they can do is play with sounds. And this is the magic of how phonological awareness first starts, because with this, they will be building such strong foundations in which they will be ready to read further along the way. So, what is phonemic awareness? When we break apart all these long words, all these long syllables, into the smallest unit of sound or phoneme. And those phonemes are sounds by themselves. And guess what happens? When children have strong foundations on phonological awareness. And we're going to be talking about that in like 3 slides. And you've also been working with alphabet knowledge, which is the ability to identify letters by its symbol, not the sound. So this is letter A or this is letter B. By the time they master these phonological awareness skills, and we hit phonemic awareness, and they know their alphabet knowledge skills, we just tell them, guess what? After they've mastered all the phonemic awareness in segmentation, isolation, blending, substituting, and deletion, we tell them that all these sounds that we've been playing with actually have a symbol. And when this happens, children start to read because they start to decode. So, yes, it is magical. And it's not just magical, it's called amazing, strong foundations. And that sounded like a TED talk. Importance of developing, we have to make it fun. You're here, it's late. Let's make it fun. Importance of phonemic awareness development. So, why is it so important? Because when we develop phonemic awareness, which is the last skill in the phonological awareness instruction, we are building those foundations before decoding. And think about it, schools and systems jumping over this main process. It's just criminal because we are technically depriving children from developmentally appropriate practices based on what they are ready for in these first years of life. We know that phonemic awareness is one of the strongest predictors for reading success. and it will help children play with these sounds back and forth when it comes to decoding. We want children to be able to enjoy developing phonemic awareness through play. And in that, I'm an expert because I've developed plenty of ways to develop all these skills through hands-on experiences and take play into action. So this little girl was jumping over the sounds. Instead of finger stretching them, she was jumping over them in phonemic awareness. I don't want to move into phonics before sharing two main things that also need to be developed prior than hitting phonics. And these two things are one, concepts about print. The concepts about print or print awareness refers to the child's understanding of the written language. And concept about print starts since they are two and they recognize McDonald's M or symbols out in the blue. They start recognizing basic symbols and they start seeing patterns. So, for example, my son Max, who's 3, whenever I ask for what letter do you see, and he would say, letter Max. He doesn't know that that's letter M. He just knows that that symbol is his symbol. And that's what we want. We want them to be able to have the awareness of print awareness and the concept about print, which is the ability of knowing that these books have a side, that they have a cover, they have a back, and how to manipulate a book successfully. We want children to be able to recognize print awareness and start developing print awareness and concepts about print. The second and very important skill that is another training by itself is alphabet knowledge. And this is something that we fail when it comes to teaching because we've always thought that teaching the alphabet has to be associated with the sound. So you go into these classrooms and you see A through Z in pre-K and in even before pre-K, and you hear the teachers go A apple A, B ball B, C car. And you know what? They don't need to know that at that age. All they need to know is to play with sounds like we've been playing and to identify the symbols as symbols. This is A, this is M, this is capital M, this is lowercase m, and we're going to be able to match both capitals and lower. I'm reading the text. Capital and lowercase letters together. If children before age 7 or actually 6 know to identify the letters, and for alphabet knowledge I also have not a course but I have a guide that I developed. It was one of my first guides as well. This came after the phonemic awareness one, and this is how it all started, because you see like this picture right here was one of my first pictures that I took teaching alphabet knowledge through play, and I have a bunch of resources on these. I created a guide that splits the alphabet in 3, and that starts with the child's name and the ability to recognize the letters of their name and moves into the first portion of the alphabet, the second portion, the third portion, and how we put them all together, how then we match capital with lowercase letters. You're probably already tired about listening to myself speak, but this part of the webinar is one of the most important parts because this is what really needs to happen before we start formally teaching children to decode. If you skip these steps, you can have two outcomes. Children who are just too good when it comes to phonemic awareness and phonological awareness skills and just figure it out in the process and never struggle with reading. Or you will have children who will fail, who will be miserable in the process, who do not necessarily have a reading problem or difficulty. What they have is lack of foundations because reading is very complex. And reading, as I mentioned before, takes time. and reading takes mastery. So children can really struggle due to lack of foundations, which is very sad. Children who have a learning disability when it comes to reading will always, and mark my words, always have to go back to phonological awareness instruction, because that's where the heart is. A dyslexic child without phonological awareness instruction will never make it to read. That's how important it is that we develop phonological awareness in all children. All children deserve a proper instruction in phonological awareness. Now, I'm going to pass this over to Christine and phonics. Phonics is what happens when children match phonemes and graphemes, all these phonemes are sounds that we have, and all these graphemes that they've been learning in alphabet knowledge together. Let's see what happens when this happens.
Amazing. Just hearing about phonological awareness wants me to go to the classroom or an intervention and get out my tiles and begin working. Like I always tell my parents, not my mom and dad, but the parents of the kids that I work with, I always like to tell them when we begin to read or to blend or to segment with sounds and we're manipulating those sounds, it's just going to be easier when we put to those tiles or to those sounds or to those steps when we add that grapheme and we begin to read. I love to begin to read with tiles, um, which is part of it. But anyway, we'll get into that. So what is phonics? Phonics is the method of teaching reading by helping children understand the relationship between the letters and the sound that they represent. It's a key part of literacy instruction because it teaches children how to decode written words by sounding them out, which is essential for fluent reading. So you see how it's all putting itself together, that umbrella with all of the areas and also with the big five. Phonics connects the visual aspects of the letters, which we call the graphemes, with their corresponding sounds, phonemes. For example, so when a child learns that letter S represents the S and that letter H represents the sound, they can blend these sounds together and then they can read a word like the word ship. Or when we put, because in this example of the word ship, we're going to have a diagram that is more advanced in this process. When we have letter S and we have letter H and then we put them together in one, it's going to sound shh, as in the word ship. And that's a more complex one, but that's the way that we go. Why is phonics important? Okay, so phonics is important for many reasons, for several reasons. So we're going to need phonics for these decoding skills because it helps children break down or to decode the words into their individual sounds. So we already practiced all of these skills in phonological awareness. So if you can just picture it, picture them manipulating the sounds using colors or using bags or tiles or caps, as Mariana was explaining. And now we're going to pass them off into phonics, into those graphemes. So basically the steps that we're going to be using for sounding out, for putting sounds together, for blending them, for segmentation, for isolation, we're going to be doing those same steps, but now in the written manner. Phonics is important for reading fluency. It's important for the spelling skills. It's important for reading comprehension. So this is why structured literacy programs are very important because we're not going to leave anything behind. We're going to have also phonics. Why is it important for struggling readers? Because children that are struggling with reading or children that have a dyslexia, they have difficulty understanding this letter sound relationships. So explicit and systematic phonics that can make a significant difference and an impact into helping them become more proficient readers. So sometimes we're going to have letter B, the basic confusion that we all know about with letter B and letter D. When we have proper phonological awareness and then we move on to work in a multisensory manner using the tiles, we're going to start also to identify the difference between the sounds b, d, and even a t or a p. Phonics instruction is essential for children to crack the code of written language. So by learning how letters and sounds they work together, they can gain the ability to decode those words, to improve their reading fluency and their comprehension, always along with phonological awareness and with the alphabet knowledge. Phonics is vital for continuing to build that block for reading success. How are we going to teach phonics? So how does phonics fit into reading development? So phonics is just one part of a well-rounded literacy program. And we should also always, and I'm going to be mentioning this like crazy, we should also include phonological awareness all the time. There is actually, and I think I mentioned this in another talk that we did before, and when we mentioned this, is that David Kilpatrick, he specifically says that up until the 4th grade, there should be phonological awareness drills. Whenever you are in your classroom, in a teaching, whatever it is that you're doing, always, and I believe that it truly helps prepare the brain for the reading part or the instruction part that you're about to do. It helps them understand better the rule that you're about to teach them or to prepare them for the reading. So I always, when I am ever in a session, in a one-on-one session, I always tell them, let's prepare the brain for reading. And I start with a drill. And that definitely works. So how are we going to be teaching phonics? So continue to speak about the systematic and an explicit way. We're going to teach the letter sound correspondence all the time. So we start with the consonants and with short vowels. So this is going to depend on a program. An explicit and systematic program that you use. So basically, sometimes we start with the vowel a, and then we move on with letters b, t, k. It will depend. In another webinar, like Mariana said, that all of these areas includes, we can add more information about why do we start with these letters of the, it's easier to, because it's a lot of information. So we have to teach the letter sounds correspondences. We're going to be blending those sounds. So whenever they have several letter sound relationships, so let's say they have the k, the a, the t. So now we start blending, just like they did in the phonological awareness. Now we're going to be doing with the letters. Then after we go through all the alphabet and we start to blend those sounds, we're going to introduce the diagraphs and the blends. So the diagraphs is 2 letters that make one sound. Sh, k, all of those. And also the blends, there are 2 or more consonants that are blended together. So I'm going to have st, like in the word stop or the word step. We're going to have blends in the beginning of words. We're going to have blends at the end of word, like in the word blend. We're going to have 2-letter blends, 3-letter blends, and so on and so forth. As we're doing this, we also practice with decodable text. So we're going to leave reading aside. So when I said a while ago that I like for children to begin to read and to read with tiles and with multi-sensory material, we do not only stick to that. We prepare, we read, we go to that instruction, like in cat. What we have all of the sounds, at. What is the last sound? What is the first sound? Just like we did before, now we're doing it in the written form. And then when we are going to make combinations of all of those letters, we do have a worksheet, or not a worksheet, but a paper in which we have all the words written down, decodable for them to understand, so that they don't get frustrated if they're struggling or if they're learning how to read. We're also going to have word families and spelling patterns so that they can form, for example, words like at and cat, or bat, or sat and mat, and they can play with words. That's where we add a little bit of playing as well. And we're going to leave the sight words, that we can call them sight words, we could call them Dolch words, irregular words, or hard words, because they don't follow the regular phonics rules that they need to be memorized, like in the word said. Phonics, building the alphabetic principle. Here is when we introduce letters and sounds in fun and playful ways. Whenever we're introducing letters and sounds in fun and playful ways, that is when we understand that phonics is understanding that letters represent those sounds, and those sounds are used to form the words. So this is the alphabetic principle. So we're going to start by introducing to the children the letter names and their corresponding sounds. And we're going to focus on one letter at a time. We are going to make sure that the learning of these sounds, that they're interactive and they're playful, and we have a lot of activities. We can sing the alphabet or alphabet songs, playing games where children can match objects to the letters, letter hunts where children can search for the letters in their environment, in books and signs and labels. We can also teach letter recognition and their corresponding sounds, always using multisensory activities to engage them. We can play with magnetic letters. We can use sand trays or alphabet puzzles to help the children learn the shapes, the sounds of the letters, and also for them to differentiate that these symbols are letters, that they're not numbers, that they're not only shapes. We practice the letter sound matching by introducing a letter and its sound together. For example, this is letter A, and it makes the sound ah, as in apple. And then we do all these activities, and I like also to work with the mirror. And now, I don't know if you have seen this before, it's done a lot in speech therapy, but now we use it, and I have seen it in a lot of programs of explicit and systematic instruction, in which they actually have a shape of the lip and a picture. So for example, if it's they're going to have just this picture or this image and the picture of the apple. So we're making that correspondence as well. Whenever we're having difficulty with those vowel sounds or with any letters, if we work with a mirror, it's definitely going to help them. We model just like Mariana did when they were working with pancake and moving like that, their lips. The same we do with each one, remembering that it's always explicit and systematic, and we take as much time as we need to teach each of the letter and sound correspondences. We can also create letter sound connections with visual aids. Other strategies for reinforcing the letter and the sound knowledge is to use these alphabet charts and posters as visual reminders. I'm going to make sure to add at some point I like to use a method or It's a program, not a method. That from UFly, I'm going to share about this later on. And it has this formation or these visual cards that we have been talking about, and how can you actually put them in a wall of your classroom or in a wall of your office when you're working with the children, when to bring each card out, and with the lips and with the shape and with the shapes and with the forms, with anything. So it really, really works to have them. And I always recommend to have a mirror. Other strategies that we can use is to incorporate that letter recognition in letter routines, in daily routines that you do with your children. Repetition is key in any structured program that you have, that you use in your classroom. Repetition is key. And engage them into simple phonics games. Teaching letter recognition and corresponding sounds. This is an excellent image that is here to represent all of what we have been seeing, all of what we have read about phonological awareness, and then about phonics, and how can it look, how does it look in a setting, even in a classroom setting, or how does it look whenever you're giving a therapy, a one-on-one session with students. So we are going to start by teaching the letter recognition and its sound. So always use, and I like to repeat a lot, use multisensory activities like playing with magnetic letters, using all of these trays and our alphabet puzzles. We're going to practice the letter sound matching by using a letter and its sounds together. And we're going to also, we can create a letter sound connections with all of these visual aids. Some of the strategies for reinforcing letter and sound knowledge. Some of the strategies, like I mentioned before, is to use those alphabet charts and posters as visual reminders. In the office that I used to have back home, I used to have them in the back. So we used to take those cards and just paste them or put them back or pull them. We're going to bring them back. We bring them to the table, and then we began to work and to form those letters, those lip formations, to use the sound trace to form all those letters in this multi-sensory manner. When we incorporate this as classroom teachers into daily routines, it's much easier for the children to remember those sounds or to remember those letters, and it's going to be easier for them to do the blending. And always to have phonics games during the class and available whenever you can, or whenever there are kids that finish certain worksheet or work that you're doing. Always have those fun games, and hopefully if they're related to what it is being taught, it is much easier.
All right, I'm back. And we will be talking about vocabulary and oral language. So this is another important key component in the umbrella that we saw before, right? So we already talked about phonological awareness that comprehends phonemic awareness. Christine talked about phonics. I am going to talk about vocabulary and oral language. We're going to start with, I'm multitasking, so bear with me. Oral language skills provide a foundation for reading and writing. And as I mentioned, since I was talking about the ages and age development, how reading looks like in early years, we talked about vocabulary back then. We talked about babies and how we started giving these babies all these words. We talked about how we expose children to words. We talked about how we wanted to enrich this vocabulary. But why is it actually so important for reading development? Let's find out. The role of a rich vocabulary in reading comprehension. And this is crucial because later on, when children, after they've started with phonics, so we have phonological awareness, which is this pre-reading, this preparation. Phonemic awareness is going to start formally giving shape to that eventual phonics. And then when they start to decode, if you see children decode at the very beginning, you will see them struggling at the beginning and they will go, what does it say all together? Car. Touch and say. Let's say it again. At. And this starts to progress along the way, and you will see it. And this would be another webinar. When we tell you that we were struggling trying to see what we fit into this one, that's actually the truth because it's a lot of information. But we did a great job summarizing all this information. So children move into this simple decoding into reading multisyllabic words, for instance, and reading these long texts. But we want children, when they're decoding, they're so focused on how those sounds sound and how we put them together that they often do not comprehend what they're reading because their brain is focusing only in these decoding skills. And if children have not developed strong phonological awareness skills, I will guarantee that decoding is going to be harder and that comprehension will come into the show later on in life. Vocabulary will help them understand what they are reading. Strong vocabulary skills not only help with understanding reading text, but also with communicating effectively in both spoken and written language. Research shows that children with a large vocabulary find easier as they quickly recognize and understand words. They find reading much easier because they find it smoother and have a better comprehension. How do we develop vocabulary? With everyday conversations, with using synonyms and varied and complex words, or if we read something, explaining that definition to our children. Um, Especially when you have bilingual families, this is also tricky because you're learning words in two languages. We want children to be able to narrate their stories of their days. And how can we involve and prompt for more word usage? We can model, we can enrich those sentences as they continue to build them. We can involve them in daily activities such as making lists. All right, you tell me what we need to buy from the grocery store, and I will write it down. What fruit do you want to eat this week? What kind of meals do you want us to prep? How can we shop for food? We want to have enriching conversations with intentional language use. We want to incorporate wordplay, such as rhyming games, like I mentioned before, word associations. We want to describe objects. We want them to really use their words when they speak, because the more they use their words, the more vocabulary they will be building. We, as parents and educators, we play a big role in vocabulary development. Exposing children to all these complex words is building vocabulary. Engaging with children into conversations. So we want, and these are some key strategies that we can use. When we read stories, for instance, we want to ask open-ended questions like, what was your favorite part of the story? Can you describe a character? What can you tell me about that character? How did the character feel? Can you tell me more details? If you were that character, what would you do? Can you change the ending to the story? We want these open-ended questions that will, at the same time, develop critical thinking. And we'll put into practice different words and thoughts. And if they don't have the words, we can help them finding those words to enrich vocabulary. We want to expand on their answers. We want to tell children when they respond, if they say that the dog is running, we might say, yes, the dog is running very fast. He's running very fast. He's actually chasing after a ball or after a red ball. Or is there another word for run? What other word could we use? We want to expand when we speak. We want to read books, and that's why it's so important. The majority of the vocabulary comes from books, and it is incredible. Kids are like sponges. They see a word once and they will recognize that word. Or I have like this, I'm going to share a story with you. It's in Spanish, but you will understand. So I took my kids to a farm back in Costa Rica, and we saw the cow's poop, which is called boñiga. So of course it was a very different word, boñiga in Spanish. They've never heard it before. And I said, this is called boñiga. So I made them repeat the word, and we said it twice. And the first thing they did when we got home was tell everyone about that new word that they learned, because it's such a different word and it's such a long word. And they also learned ubre, which is the lower part of the cow. And they came home also sharing about these two words. And I found a teaching moment right there. They focused my attention in two words that I knew they didn't know. And I taught those words right there in that specific setting. These experiences and daily experiences help us teach vocabulary. We don't have to be teaching vocabulary all the time, but we can expand on words and definitions as we experience different settings. Last but not least, we want to have many picture books all over the house. The more books, the better. I have books everywhere. And I'm going to actually make this image larger. So this is one of my best recommendations. I have those clear bins right there. I was doing a book rotation. So I have a bookshelf, which is uh, not this one, but very similar to this one. These are only my books. I have some books for them in the lower shelf, and they come into my office and they grab books that are here. But I also have a bookshelf out in their play area where I have the main library, and from that library I have these translucent boxes, which I like that they're clear, because I select books like every month or every month and a half, and I rotate them. So I have a bin downstairs, I have another bin in their room, I have, well, they have a bookshelf in their room, I have another bin in the play space upstairs. Sometimes I put books in the playroom, and this helps me rotate the books all over the house. And as I am being honest with you, I've noticed that they have not been reading that much downstairs. And there's no coincidence. Those books I have not changed like in 3 months. They probably are already bored about the books. And if I take that bin upstairs and just refresh it and put it down with new books, they will stay there for hours. So preparing and books and not books, preparing spaces with books all over your home, all over your classroom. And how do you do it in the classroom? I also have a bookshelf, but I also, let's say, showcase different books depending on the interest, or I put them in a specific area and I mm, showcase those books. That will keep children engaged with books. They want to read, they want to see them more often, they want to constantly be reading. The more books that you expose children to, the more vocabulary they will build, the more they will want to read. And if you have a dual language, exposing them to books in both languages is also an amazing recommendation. Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, folk tales, you change all the genres. It's very important. We pause to explain new words when we're reading, or we can ask, do you know what this word means? If they say no, we explain. And more than explaining, I always like to use the word in another context that they will actually understand, because they will relate that word to their own world, make sense out of the world, out of, I am tired, out of the word, and they will be able to use it in different contexts. Of course, if you're reading a book and you're explaining 12 words in that book, they will never want to read a book again with you ever, ever again. So choose wisely, choose 2, 3 words in that book that you want to teach them. Support vocabulary growth through book exploration. As I mentioned, different. I buy non-fiction books are always a hit, and fiction books are as well. But non-fiction, children absolutely love having books about dinosaurs and space. And I love the Nat Geo collection. And there's some other really cool books on leaves, on trees, on things that I keep learning because I don't recall seeing all these facts. They're for older children. They're books about fun facts about X, Y, or Z, the 2024 weirdest events ever, and things that we don't know about, and then we learn about when we read with them. So having this balance between different picture books is also a great way to develop vocabulary.
Writing as a part of reading. We can never leave writing behind in this process. It's very important because we're going to be putting them together. All of that decoding, how are we going to be writing or how are we going to be spelling later on. But early writing as a part of reading or as a part of literacy, it's very important. All those scribbling, because that's how they begin, all that scribbling leads to their writing development. So we must encourage from our homes to express, for children to express themselves through drawing and to writing. So I remember my children's, I have 3 kids, so the oldest, the other one, the third one is a baby, but the oldest 2, they will always be coloring or they will always be scribbling. And at times, as they started their language development, they would draw a line and they would say that that was mom, or they would draw a circle, that was the dog at the moment. So all of those expressions, all of that is very important for them. Those are scribblings. Those are their first writing. That's that exposure, and that is very important for their development, so that they can later transfer that into letters and into numbers and into that print. Pre-writing skills, scribbling to writing. So how early scribbling can lead to this writing development. So as I mentioned before, scribbling is one of the first steps that each child takes toward that journey of writing. So just like my son's drawings, that they just look like random marks and just there were scribbles, but they all meant something. A family member, the pet, or their favorite toy. These are very essential pre-writing skills, and they also help develop their hand-eye coordination, which we're going to be needing for writing and also for reading. We need that eye coordination. We have the hand, and now we start with those scribbling or with that writing. As the child begins to progress, scribbling is going to get more sophisticated. It's going to evolve into more controlled shapes and lines that resemble letters, numbers, or even shapes. And we're getting closer to that written language. It's always very, very important to encourage children to express themselves through drawing and to writing. So this is one of the things, even with my oldest children, that I like to do whenever we have a very frustrating day or a sad day or something happened or we're missing our family back home, we draw. So last week we drew together, the 3 of us. We got out a piece of paper and we began also to express even our emotions, even how I was feeling. And then I was drawing something that helped me even feel better. So always, if we do that every single time, it works. Even if they're tiny, if they're just scribbling. Always have a variety of materials. I have like an art caddy in my home. And I have paintings, and I have crayons, I have aquarellas, I have watercolors, sorry. I have Sharpies, I have pencils, and all of these different forms of expression so that they can be exposed to that, and they can always find a piece of paper that is also in that art caddy, and a lot of pencils. Because the older they get, sometimes they start to use a little bit less color, but they're always drawing, and they're always making their comic books or whatever as they get a little bit older. Um, and this is very important whenever we have a print rich environment, because they have access to that written material. So if we have even if a child sometimes is struggling with letters and they begin to draw, and maybe they like to draw comic books, they're going to be adding some words there to make their picture come to life. So always try to have all of those things available so that children can be always exposed to that writing. Um, and with the mix of colors and marks, they can start also, or they can continue to express through their art and through their writing. And we can also talk about vocabulary, and that's where we join or we add some of the other components of reading. We start to express ourselves with more vocabulary and with more description, because we're going to need vocabulary. We're going to need description for what? For writing, for that complex process that it's even writing a sentence, a complete sentence, whenever we need to express a feeling, and whenever we need, or just an idea, because that's what it is. A sentence is an idea. Linking writing and reading. So there is a connection between writing and reading. How can we do that with children? We are going to encourage them to label their drawings or to tell stories about them. So this is something that I always do with my kids. Whenever they draw, even if it's a comic book for my older child, or for my middle child who's just drawing a random picture and just adding some colors there, there's always a story behind a picture. There's always a glimpse of their imagination we can see there, and that we cannot let that opportunity pass, so that we can ask questions, and questions, WH questions, of what, of where, when, what is going on here, what was the feeling, when did this happen, so that they can start expressing more and more each time. Never let those opportunities happen. We can even label them. We can ask them to label them. So I used to do this with when they were smaller, whenever they were scribbling or they were just drawing lines, and they already told me what each one meant, or if it was a family member, I would definitely, as soon as the child or my son left, I would just turn the paper around or write underneath the scribbling what it meant. So they would remember. So sometimes I show it to them, and they're like, "What? That was you? That was the dog? The scribbling, that circle?" So, and we can keep a record, even if it's our own children, of how they are evolving in their drawing. Ask open-ended questions about their drawings, just like I mentioned, not only for imagination, but also for this vocabulary that we need, like what is happening in your picture. And this can promote also storytelling, and we can join that storytelling of what they're doing, so that they can make sense, or we can help them make sense, and we can help them organize and structure whatever it is that they are giving, or they are saying, or they want to express. And we have to let them, whenever they are doing some early invented spelling and they're little and they're writing and they're making a lot of mistakes, leave them. Sometimes with my kids, I used to leave them, not correct a lot of things, because I wanted them to for that art, or for that moment, just to be free and to express without always me correcting that spelling. This is going to help all of these strategies that we use with the writing and with the reading and with the drawing and with this exposure and with this, from the scribbling to the writing to this expression. This is going to be that connection between the writing and then to understand a text. So the reading and the writing, they're interconnected processes. And so as children practice their writing, they start to understand that the letters are representing the sounds and that the writing is a way to communicate these ideas, just as the reading conveys the meaning of words or the meaning of a story or of an idea. So through the writing, children can gain the understanding of how those letters, they can form words, and how do words create sentences, which is going to reinforce their phonemic awareness and their decoding skills. Just like we were talking about when Mariana was talking about phonological awareness, that she begins with words and sentences, counting out words. The same thing whenever we are writing, the same thing. It's all connected. Reading what they write. So even if it's a drawing, even if it's not very well spelled, even if there's no writing in it, it's always very important to have them read it back to you so that they can express what they drew, what they wrote, what they expressed. Is very, very important. And always, this is like, whenever they're drawing, I'm like very busy, or moms or parents were always very busy at something. And no, we have to take that time. Like, this is very important. Let's go through it. Read it to me. This is very important. I want to know what it says. What were you feeling? Or not only about feelings, but what is actually happening on there. And the same thing as I mentioned before, those visual cues. So we can support that early writing with visual cues, with providing visual aids, alphabet charts, or word walls, even if it's in our own home or in our classroom or in our therapy session office. So we can encourage children to write simple things, very simple things, even if they're struggling or not struggling writers or readers. And how can we do this? By labeling their artwork, labeling a pencil, labeling a notebook, finding words or in books and then writing on top, not of all the books because Mariana will kill me, but of certain books or of certain things, finding those words, and that is very important. So this helped them become more familiar with letters and with words, which is going to build their confidence in both reading and in writing.
I have this situation. So I need like 2 minutes while I put both of my kids down. Well, that is probably snoring. So give me 1 second, okay? I'm back. And the kids are here with me, so this is going to be very interesting because we're going to finish and they're going to behave so well. And this is part of motherhood and making it all work because this webinar is longer than we thought, and it's going to be like 2 hours. So we are going to move to read alouds. So let's start with read alouds. Why is it so important? And I've been talking about reading and reading to children and reading to them at all times. And as I mentioned before, read alouds will be the foundation of early reading. Read alouds will be one of the most impactful ways to build a child's early literacy skills. It introduces them to language, to new vocabulary, and sentence structure in a natural, enjoyable way. as I mentioned before, being able to build these sentences, these thoughts, being able to develop all this vocabulary will happen through shared reading. Shared reading involves both the adult and the child actively engaging with the text. And I'm always the one taking the pictures. So I didn't have a picture of me reading aloud, but I had one of Elena reading aloud, which is as powerful as being me in that picture. So reading aloud, and it never ends, not even when children know how to decode. Read aloud and share reading is one of the best gifts we can give our children. It helps them develop love for reading overall. There's a fun fact that children who are regularly read to are exposed to more than 1.4 million words annually, building a rich oral vocabulary that will support their reading comprehension later on. Isn't that crazy? Daily read alouds and share reading are foundational practices at school, at home. I do a lot of read alouds also in my learning environment, and they absolutely love it. Um, we have to keep reading to our children, no matter the age. Um, Shared reading also at school is recommended. We want to build, and reading aloud is not only building reading skills, it's going to build emotional and social emotional bonds and skills. We're going to prepare children emotionally, we're going to prepare them cognitively, and their vocabulary growth will be um, sophisticated through through stories, through texts, through things that we can provide children, and short texts that we can provide children to learn about different things. It will also give them cultural exposure. It will allow children to explore different worlds, cultures, and perspectives from all angles in the world. Um, and I skipped this. I already talked about this a little bit, but engaging children in reading is powerful. We want, as Christine mentioned, we want children to be able to engage through a lot of comprehension skills that didn't we didn't dive in depth into comprehension, but we want them to ask questions, which is a really good comprehension skill that we develop. We want them to make predictions. We want them to discuss characters. We want them to make visualize the story. We want children to be able to come up with all these comprehension skills when we're reading the books. And we need to know which are these comprehension skills, which again, it'll be a complete webinar by itself if we were to read, if we were to teach about comprehension. We want children to build out of this interactive reading. We want them to build the love for reading. We want them to build language development, comprehension, and critical skills. Choosing the right books, and I will be talking about this right now, and later on also through in my next module. I have just a couple here, and I don't have the baby books anymore. But when children are young, we want to use these word books, which are thicker. They can manipulate them back and forth. Excuse me. They can manipulate them back and forth. They're not as fragile. We want to give this type of book, since they're like babies all the way up to age 3 or 4. I have to be honest, I don't get rid of my board books because some of them are so gorgeous that I still keep them. There's a new type of books that is like indestructible, and you can even pour water on them, that is perfect for little kids and babies. We choose the right stories. We choose stories that are easy to read, stories that are easy to follow. And on my Amazon link, Amazon storefront, which I'll be sharing with you, I have a list of books in both English and one list of Spanish books. I have alphabet knowledge materials, letter play, reading instruction materials that you will be able to enjoy. We want to have storybooks. We want stories that just either teach you something or just entertain you. There's so many fascinating books. That's kind of my problem, that I cannot stop buying books. We can also, as they get older, and not even that old, like my toddlers really enjoy not this weather book, but they are into elephants and safaris, and they love to go through books that give them just facts and make them ask questions. And we can actually, these type of books are great for read alouds, and we can share like little topics, and we can teach them about these nonfiction books. These are the ones that I was sharing with you. All these Nat Geo books are an amazing resource for all ages. In those little clear bins that I shared with you before, I usually mix both fiction and nonfiction within the bin, so they get an ample selection. I also do the same thing in my learning environment. We're going to move on into play and literacy development. And I could speak about play nonstop, but I'm just going to make it simple and quick, and how I involve play into literacy development. We talk about literacy, as I mentioned before, it's not just about reading a book, or it's not just about decoding. When we read and we talk about reading, we want to make sure that we also come across experiences, that we choose the right books for the classroom, for home, and that we find books that are great ways in which our children can develop more skills. So this was an invitation to play that I had after. This is one of our favorite books. This is one, Para Tico Tango, and it's also in Spanish, and it has a lot of rhyming. Tico Tango has lots of rhyming, so we know it by memory in our home. So, el loro Tico Tango tiene en el pico un mango, y debajo de su lomo un limón amarillo que se lo come Felipillo. I cannot recall everything, but everything's like, it rhymes and the kids love it. It also rhymes in the English version. And the previous picture that I showed you, this is Alberto at age 3. And he was um, uh, representing the book, and he was summarizing the book and the story using characters and using loose parts. So we can transfer this knowledge. We can make summaries, which is a great comprehension skill, through play. I love to link my read alouds with art, with cooking, with open ended play, with loose parts, because this is a great way to develop all skills needed for comprehension, vocabulary acquisition, and overall reading development. We want children to be able to, and I forgot to mention before, I'm sorry, something very important when it comes to books is that we can also relate them to pretend play. Pretend play is a very powerful strategy that we can use and blend when it comes to reading instruction books and comprehension skills. Independent exploration of books. So we want children to be able to explore books by themselves, to know where the books are, to go and enjoy themselves within the books and stories, and that are not just used to us reading the stories. Read alouds are powerful, but we also want children to encourage those habits of enjoying self-directed reading, or just glimpsing at the pictures and going through the books. We want to make sure that we teach them how to handle the books, how to treat them with respect, how every book is a new adventure and a different world overall. There's also powerful books that are wordless books. And there's also books that have no pictures. And they're all both magical. Exposing children to all these types of books with different flaps, textures, and sounds are also great ways to promote play through reading instruction.
All right, so this is the last part of our session for today, addressing reading challenges. How can we recognize those early reading struggles? What's very important here is how we address. I'm going to speak very briefly about the signs that a child may be struggling with early literacy skills so that we can make that early identification. And that is one of the most important parts when we can identify early and begin intervention, that early intervention. We can intervene even throughout elementary, and that has been also during my private practice, and where I intervene with children of a lot of ages, from even 5 or 6 years old up until middle school. Sometimes they even come in high school to work in certain areas. But I'm going to mention some signs that a child might be struggling with the early literacy skills, and that would be difficulty with phonological awareness, difficulty in remembering colors, remembering numbers, in remembering sounds and remembering certain names, has limited vocabulary, and is very reluctant to engage in reading activities, and reading comprehension difficulties, not only because he's reading the book, but sometimes when the book is being read to him or to her. How can we support children with that have a language delay or a reading difficulty? Well, the first is that early intervention. That is very crucial. And we could just talk about this in another webinar about early intervention and about assessing children, when to evaluate them, when to identify areas, and how to make those referrals. That would be another long webinar with a lot of information to share. But this early intervention is very crucial, and the earlier reading struggles are identified and they're addressed, the more successful children will be. And I always talk about this, and it's about sometimes, we have said it before, and maybe me as a younger self has said it before. Let's just give the child some time. And sometimes we do have to give them time. But what about while we give them time? How about if we work all these areas that he's struggling at? But how about if we work phonological awareness? Because even if a child is dyslexic or not dyslexic, the way that we read is the same for everybody. And phonological awareness and phonemic awareness and everything, that structured literacy works for all types of learners. We can work closely with each child. If we identify that something is going on there, we can tell the parents, we can work with a child, recommend simple activities like we have done today about rhyming, about onset and rhyme, about phonological awareness, always in a multisensory form, in a multisensory manner that we need to work. With smaller children, it's recommended to have frequent but shorter sessions, sometimes sessions of several minutes, or if it depends on how you're working. Sometimes there are even moms work directly with their kids. So every day, a few drills of phonological awareness, and of just saying the alphabet, singing the alphabet song, finding those letters, identifying. There's tons of activities that you can do with your kids or even with your students on a daily basis. Very short activities that's not going to take a lot of time, but for them, that repetition works amazing. And always remember to encourage that reading in a stress-free environment. So we never force children to read. That your teacher says that you have to read. So you're going to sit down and you're going to read to me. Maybe he's struggling. Maybe sometimes we can read to them a book and they can read certain words, or they're being exposed. So this is very important, just like Mariana was saying, the exposure that we have to that reading. How do we support these diverse learners? So here is where we talk a little bit about strategies for children with special needs, or if they have language delays, or even bilingual learners, that we're going to be talking a lot about that. Not today, don't worry. We have children with special needs. How can we address, or how can we go toward that way when their learning has a different process? Sometimes we can tailor this reading activities to meet their specific needs. We can use assistive tools, adaptive tools, larger books. We have to adapt according to the way that they're also learning, that we know according to their profile. If there is a language delay, we have to focus on building oral language through rich interactive conversations, through pictures, vocabulary, descriptions of those pictures, so that we can build emphasis in building and in comprehension. For bilingual learners, which I have a lot of experience working with bilingual learners back home in Costa Rica. They were learning English and their interventions were in English, their school system was in English. And I can share a little bit more about that in another webinar with another more information in that area. So with bilingual learners, we have to work on the child's native language. So for those phonological awareness skills, if they're not fluent in English, they don't have that vocabulary, it's always recommended let's work them in Spanish first, and then we can move on to the second language, which is going to make it better, and it is transferable. Or I don't know how you say it, but yeah, I think that's the word. And we can adjust the pace of the instruction according to our student needs, depending on what they need. If they are fast learners, if they're slower learners, or if they have attention deficit, or if they have dyslexia, or if they're struggling in their learning. We can adapt certain activities to meet their individual needs. We can use those visual aids and those tactile tools. We can even incorporate technology, and this is recommended for older kids. To use apps, certain audiobooks later on. We always prefer to work on everything that is multisensory, hands-on, and then we'll move on as they grow up to more technology. If it's in a classroom setting, we can have this flexible grouping and that small instruction, and teachers are so smart at this, how they place their lower learners sometimes with their high learners, so that they can be I don't know, they do it amazingly, this flexible grouping. Have always this positive reinforcement always with them. Those words, as we always tell them, it just builds confidence in them all the time when we celebrate each of the progress, no matter how small. And immediate feedback is always very important. And even if sometimes they're not doing a good job in reading, or they're very tired of the session, we give them an A, right, for effort. And always promote inclusive reading practices. Always study, read, investigate. We have now information everywhere that we go, information about how can we become better practitioners in what we do as intervention, and also in how we teach. And get that family involved, that family engagement, to encourage families to take this active role in their child's literacy development. And sometimes families try, sometimes they don't have the tools. So sometimes we need to be an advocate, we need to educate, and we need to motivate. And from the Reading League, we know that our children can be taught to read properly the first time. In a knowledge economy, the current of the 21st century will be built on the foundation of skilled reading. Students who can read well have a place at the table of opportunity wherever their aspirations lead them to preparation for college or the workforce. And thank you so much.
I keep muting myself and forget to unmute. Thank you very much for being here. Against all odds, we finished this amazing webinar. I think, as Christine mentioned, It was too much information, and I told Christine before we started we're gonna make it in 2 hours, and it's 2 hours and 4 minutes. Thank you for staying here. A lot of you will be coming back to the recording, and I'm glad that you will, because this is a lot of information. I have several announcements to make. So those of you who bought this webinar, we will be uploading it into the Play Lab as a course. So we will be cropping all the different parts of the webinar for you to go back to it depending on the portion that you want to review. Eventually, we will also make this webinar a masterclass, because believe it or not, these 2 hours are just the introduction of a 10 module course that we are cooking together. So eventually we will come up with a masterclass. Each of these domains that we mentioned have so much information that we want to consider, that we want to share with you. But that takes time, and we are already working on it. And this was the idea of the webinar, gave us the push towards that other course. As we were developing this webinar, we could not make it all fit. Good news are that, as I mentioned before, I already have this portion created. This will be part of that masterclass. This webinar will be part of the masterclass. You can actually purchase this pre-recorded webinar for phonological awareness, which once again, I tell you, it's not just because I created it. It's amazing. And it's very simple, very simple. It's a very simple starting guide. Give me 1 second. It's a very simple starting guide that is available only for $17.99. And the best part is that you guys will have a discount. So you will have a 10% discount with this code that I'm going to show on screen in 1 second. Let me show you. So you have read 10 is the discount at checkout. And I am going to also show, so read 10 is the code. And I'm going to share the link here in the comments. I don't see any questions in the comment section. If you want to go ahead and send any questions, feel free to do so. If not, you can always go. You'll have access to this webinar on the Play Lab, and you can always comment underneath each lesson if you have questions or if you want to add something. So this said, you can also access the pre-recorded webinar for phonological awareness for $17.99, and using the coupon code READ10, you'll have a 10% discount. And this is so Spanglish, I'm sorry. I was multitasking, and of course at 11 p.m. with 2 kids next to me, it's very hard. So there you go. There we go. So this is your discount. I hope that you enjoyed. Once again, this is a lot of information. You'll probably have to come back to the recording. The recording will be sent tomorrow as the whole webinar on a YouTube link. We will be working on cropping this webinar over the next 2 weeks, and it will be available in the Play Lab. And if you purchased it, you will have access to it. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Once again, I'm checking the comments, no questions, and see you soon.